SOS sent to Deathworlders. An entire human, then human dreadnoughts emerged. The war had been going on for 6 years, and the coalition of free worlds was losing. What had started as a small border conflict with the Kriv swarm had grown into something much bigger, something that now threatened every planet that belonged to the coalition. The Kriv were not like other enemies the coalition had fought before. They did not ask for peace. They did not want land or resources. They wanted to erase every other form of life from the galaxy, and they were very good at it. Admiral Sethrin Vale stood on the bridge of the coalition flagship, the Dawnbringer, and watched the tactical display with tired eyes. Red dots, hundreds of them, were closing in on the fleet from 3 directions. Blue dots, the coalition ships, were far fewer, and they were shrinking in number every minute. The battle for the Thrall system had already been lost. Now it was only a question of how many ships could escape before the Kriv swarm caught up with them. "Admiral, we are losing the Vantor and the Alin," said Lieutenant Cass, a young Valari officer with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Her voice was shaking, but she kept her post. "Shields are failing on 6 more ships." Sethrin closed his eyes for a moment. He was Valari too, though older, and he had seen many battles in his long life. He had never seen anything like this. The Kriv did not fight like an army. They fought like a flood, pouring over everything in their path, and no matter how many of them the coalition destroyed, more always came. "Order a full retreat," Sethrin said. "Get every ship that can still fly out of this system." "Sir, if we retreat, the Kriv will reach Velar Prime in less than 4 months." "I know," Sethrin said quietly. "But if we do not retreat, we will not have a fleet left to defend Velar Prime at all." The bridge was silent except for the beeping of alarms and the low hum of the engines working at full power. Sethrin turned away from the display and walked to a small console near the back of the bridge. It was old, older than most of the ship itself, and it had not been used in decades. He placed his hand on a panel beside it, and a soft light began to glow. "Sir?" Cass asked, confused. "What is that?" "It is something my grandfather told me about," Sethrin said. "A beacon. It was built a long time ago, back when the first coalition worlds were founded. It is meant to call for help from the Deathworlders." Cass's eyes widened. Every child in the coalition grew up hearing stories about the Deathworlders. They were a species, some said a myth, that lived on a planet so hostile, so dangerous, that almost nothing should have been able to survive there. A planet with earthquakes, storms, diseases, predators larger than starships in the old legends, and 1,000 other things that killed without warning. And somehow, a species had not only survived there, but had thrived. They called themselves humans, and the stories said they were dangerous beyond imagination, not because they wanted to hurt anyone, but because their entire world had trained them to survive against impossible odds. "Sir, the humans are not even part of the coalition," Cass said. "Nobody has spoken to them in generations. Some say they do not even exist anymore, that the stories were exaggerated by our ancestors. Then we will find out today whether the stories were true," Sethrin said, "because we are out of other options." He pressed his palm against the panel, and the beacon began to hum. A signal shot out from the ship, faster than anything the coalition fleet had, racing across the stars toward a distant, quiet corner of the galaxy that the maps simply labeled as unknown territory, do not approach. Far away, deep in that unknown territory, on a planet called Earth, the signal was received. It arrived first at a small listening station on the edge of what humans called the Sol Defense Network, a chain of automated posts built long ago and mostly forgotten by the public. The station had not registered an outside signal in over 80 years. When the alarm went off, the 2 technicians on duty nearly fell out of their chairs. "What is that?" asked one of them, a woman named Priya Okafor, staring at the readout. "I don't know," said her partner, a man named Daniel Reyes. "It's not one of ours. It's not automated traffic either. This is an actual transmission." From outside the system, Priya's hands moved quickly over the console, pulling up every scrap of data the station could give her. The frequency matches the old Coalition beacon protocol, the one from the archives. The mutual defense signal. Daniel looked at her. "You mean the one from the first contact treaties? The one that hasn't been used since before either of us were born? That's the one, Priya said. Someone out there just called for help, and they called us. Word moved fast after that. Within an hour, the signal had been forwarded to Earth Defense Command. Within 3 hours, it had reached the office of General Marcus Whitfield, the head of Earth's Joint Fleet Command, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s who had spent his whole career preparing for a day he had honestly never expected to come. General Whitfield read the decoded message 3 times before he set it down on his desk. "This is real?" he asked the officer standing across from him. "As far as we can tell, sir, yes. The signal matches the old Coalition beacon exactly. Whoever sent this either has access to genuine archived Coalition technology, or this is the real thing." The message itself was simple, translated by the old linguistic protocols left behind from the treaties centuries ago. It said only this: "We are the Coalition of Free Worlds. We are under attack by an enemy we cannot defeat alone. We ask for help, as was promised long ago. Please respond." General Whitfield leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. Humanity had made contact with alien life exactly once, centuries ago, in the early days of interstellar travel. That first meeting had gone badly. The aliens of that era, ancestors of the Coalition species, had been terrified of humans. Terrified of a species that came from a world with crushing gravity, extreme weather, deadly wildlife, and constant natural disasters, and yet had not only survived, but built cities, ships, and weapons. The stories that came out of that meeting painted humans as something close to monsters, creatures who could shrug off wounds that would kill anyone else, who did not know how to give up, who kept fighting long after any sane species would have surrendered. Humanity had been polite. It had offered friendship, but the fear on the other side had never gone away, and eventually, contact was cut, and both sides drifted into their own corners of the galaxy. Centuries passed. Humanity grew, explored, built its own colonies, and mostly forgot the aliens ever existed, except in old stories and history books. Now, out of nowhere, one of those old contacts had come back, and they were asking for help. "Sir, what do we do?" the officer asked. General Whitfield thought about it for a long moment. He thought about the treaties from centuries ago, still technically valid, still sitting in the deepest archives of Earth's government. He thought about the fact that whoever had sent this message clearly believed the treaties still meant something, even after all this time. And he thought about what kind of enemy could frighten a fleet enough to reach out to a species they had once been afraid of themselves. "Get me the president," Whitfield said. "And get me everything we have on Coalition space. Ship charts, old contact logs, anything. If someone out there is calling for help, we're going to answer. But I want to know exactly what we're walking into first." Within a day, the message had reached the highest levels of Earth's government. The debate that followed was intense. Some argued that humanity owed these aliens nothing, that they had cut off contact first out of fear, and that answering the call now was a needless risk. Others argued that the treaties, old as they were, still bound humanity's word, and that a species that turned its back on someone begging for help was not a species worth being proud of. In the end, the second argument won, helped along by something simple. The President of Earth stood before the cameras and said that humanity did not abandon people who asked for help, whether they were human or not. The first response was small, deliberately so. Nobody in Earth's command wanted to send a massive show of force into unknown territory without understanding what they were dealing with. A single fast scout ship, the Meridian, was prepared for a journey to the coordinates buried in the old beacon signal. Its job was simple: make contact, assess the situation, and report back. Captain Elena Voss was given command of the mission. She was young for her rank, only 34, but she had a reputation for calm decision-making under pressure, and command trusted her to handle whatever she found on the other side of that signal. Her crew was small, only 12 people, chosen for their skill and their steady nerves. "You understand what you're walking into," General Whitfield told her personally, the night before launch. "We don't know what's out there. We don't know how strong this enemy is that's got an entire alien coalition scared enough to call on a species they haven't spoken to in centuries." "I understand, sir," Elena said. "If it looks like more than your ship can handle, You don't engage. You observe, you record, and you come home. We'll decide the next step once we know what we're dealing with. Yes, sir. The Meridian launched the next morning, slipping out of Earth's orbit and vanishing into the deep dark beyond the edge of known human space. It would take several weeks to reach Coalition territory, even at the ship's best speed. During that time, back on Earth, quiet preparations began. Fleet Command did not wait idly. Ships in reserve were checked and rechecked. Old defense agreements were pulled from storage and studied. Nobody knew yet how big this was going to get, but everyone in command had the same feeling, the same instinct honed by generations of caution. If an entire coalition of alien worlds was afraid enough to call on humanity for help, then whatever was hunting them out there was something worth being ready for. Meanwhile, back in Coalition space, the situation had grown worse. Admiral Sethrin Vale's fleet had retreated from the Threll system, but the Kriv swarm did not stop. It pushed forward, system by system, consuming everything in its path. Colonies were evacuated. Entire worlds were abandoned. The Coalition Council debated desperately over strategy, but nothing they tried seemed to slow the swarm down for long. Any word from the beacon? Counselor Yoon Thess asked during an emergency session, her voice tight with worry. She represented the Thun species, one of the founding members of the Coalition. Nothing yet, Sethrin admitted. It has only been a few weeks. If the humans still exist, and if they receive the signal, it will take time for them to respond. Their old territory was far from ours, even by the standards of Coalition ships. And that is assuming they still have the same technology, or better. And if they do not respond at all, another counselor asked, if the stories were only stories, and there is nothing left of the humans but ruins. Nobody had a good answer to that question. All they could do was keep fighting, keep retreating, and keep hoping that somewhere out in the dark, someone had heard their call. 3 weeks after leaving Earth, the Meridian dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of what used to be Coalition territory. Captain Elena Voss stood on the bridge, watching the sensors sweep the area, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Debris, fields of it, stretching for what looked like millions of kilometers. Broken ships, some of them larger than anything Earth had ever built, torn apart and drifting silently in the dark. Burned-out husks of what must have once been space stations, and in the distance, faint but growing stronger on her sensors, the telltale energy signatures of a battle still raging somewhere ahead. "My God," said her first officer, a broad man named Tomasz Kowalski, staring at the display. "What did this?" "I don't know," Elena said quietly, "but whatever it is, it's still out there. And it did all of this to a fleet that looks like it might have been bigger than anything we have back home." She turned to her communications officer. "Send the standard first contact protocol on the old Coalition frequency. Let them know we received their signal, and record everything. Command needs to see this." As the message went out, Elena stared at the wreckage stretching endlessly before her ship, and for the first time since taking command, she felt a genuine chill run down her spine. Whatever was out here, it was strong enough to shatter an entire alien civilization's defenses, and Earth had just sent one small scout ship, and a promise, into the middle of it. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, a Coalition patrol picked up the Meridian's signal. Word raced back through the chain of command, faster than anything else had moved in weeks, carrying with it a single message that would change the course of the war. The Deathworlders had answered. The Coalition patrol that found the Meridian was a single damaged cruiser called the Half-Light, limping along on backup power with half its crew already lost to the war. Its captain, a Zandi officer named Oren Dask, almost did not believe the reading on his sensors when it first appeared. An unknown ship, using old identification codes that matched nothing in the current registry, but matched perfectly with records from centuries ago. Records belonging to a species called humans. "Hail them!" Oren ordered, his 4 eyes fixed on the screen. "Carefully! If this is truly a human ship, we do not want our first act in generations to be an insult." The response from the Meridian came quickly, translated smoothly through old shared protocols that neither side had used in a very long time, but that still, somehow, worked. Captain Elena Voss appeared on the screen, calm despite the tension in her shoulders. This is Captain Elena Voss of the Earth vessel Meridian. We received a distress signal identified as belonging to the Coalition of Free Worlds. We are here to assess the situation and report back to our command. Oren stared at the human on his screen for a long moment. She looked almost fragile compared to the old stories, not much taller than a Xandi, with soft features and no visible weapons on her body. And yet there was something in the way she held herself, something calm and unshaken, even as she sat in the middle of a debris field left behind by a war that had already broken a dozen worlds. "Captain Voss," Oren said carefully, "I am Captain Oren Dask, of the Coalition cruiser Half-Light. On behalf of the Coalition, I welcome you, and I thank you for answering our call. I must warn you, however, that the situation here is very dangerous. An enemy we call the Kriv Swarm has been destroying our worlds for 6 years. We are losing this war." "Show me," Elena said simply. Oren sent over what data he had. Elena watched in silence, as reports scrolled across her screen. Worlds lost, fleets destroyed, populations evacuated with nowhere left to go. The Kriv Swarm was not a single nation or empire in the way humans understood it. It was closer to what old Earth scientists might have called a hive, an enormous collection of biological and mechanical creatures that grew and multiplied endlessly, consuming resources, technology, and life itself to fuel its expansion. It had no capital to attack, no leader to negotiate with. It simply grew, and grew, and grew, and nothing the Coalition had thrown at it had been enough to stop it. "How many ships do you have left?" Elena asked. Oren hesitated. "Fewer than we started with, far fewer. I need exact numbers, if you can give them. My command back home is going to need real information, not just an idea of how bad this is." Oren gave her what numbers he could, and Elena's expression did not change, though inside, she felt the weight of it settle heavily on her chest. This was not a border skirmish. This was a civilization on the edge of collapse. "I need to send this back to Earth," Elena said. "It will take time for a full response to reach you, but I promise you, Captain Dask, we do not make promises lightly. If Earth agrees to help, help will come." "Thank you, Captain Voss," Oren said. "I only hope it comes soon enough." Elena spent the next several hours gathering everything she could. She had her crew scan the debris field, record energy signatures from the Kriv ship still fighting somewhere in the distance, and compile every scrap of intelligence the Coalition was willing to share. Then, with a heavy heart, she gave the order to turn the Meridian around and begin the long journey back to Earth. Every day they waited was a day the Coalition might not have. 3 weeks later, the Meridian arrived back in Earth's home system, and Elena Voss found herself standing before the Joint Fleet Command Council, along with General Whitfield and several other senior officers, laying out everything she had seen. "They are losing," Elena said bluntly, once she had finished her report. "Not slowly either. If nothing changes, the Coalition of Free Worlds will not exist within the year. Whole species could be wiped out." The room was silent for a long moment. Then General Whitfield spoke. "Recommendation?" "We help them," Elena said without hesitation. "I know it's not our fight. I know we don't owe them anything after the way that first contact went all those years ago. But I saw that debris field, General. I saw what's left after this enemy passes through a system. If we do nothing, and it turns out this Kriv swarm eventually reaches human space too, we will wish we had acted while we still had allies to help us." Whitfield nodded slowly. He had expected this answer, and privately, he agreed with it. But convincing the rest of the government would not be so simple. The debates that followed lasted for days. Earth had grown strong in the centuries since its brief and uneasy first contact with alien life. It had colonized a modest cluster of systems near its home star, built a capable defense fleet, and developed technology that, while different in style, was every bit as advanced as what the Coalition possessed, in some areas even more so. But committing military forces to a war on the far side of known space, against an enemy nobody fully understood, was not a decision anyone wanted to make lightly. In the end, it was the President of Earth who settled the argument, standing before the Joint Council, with a simple statement that would be repeated for generations afterward. A species is measured, not by how it treats its friends, but by how it treats those who once feared it, and are now desperate enough to ask for help anyway. We will not be remembered as the ones who turned away. The order was given. Earth would respond to the Coalition's call for help, not with a token gesture, but with real force. The first wave would not be massive, not yet, since Command still did not fully understand the scale of the threat, but it would be enough to make a difference. A full division of Earth's ground forces, supported by a modest fleet of warships, would be sent to Coalition space to assist however they could, while Earth's shipyards began quietly preparing something larger, just in case. Among the soldiers selected for the first wave was Sergeant First Class Marcus Reyes, no relation to the technician who had first received the signal, a veteran of Earth's small but sharp conflicts against pirate fleets near the outer colonies. He was broad-shouldered, calm under pressure, and had a reputation among his squad for never leaving anyone behind, no matter how bad the situation got. "You ever fought aliens before, Sarge?" one of his younger soldiers, Private Wu, asked as they boarded the transport ship that would carry them to the front. "Nobody's fought aliens before, kid," Marcus said. "Not really, not like this." "You scared?" Marcus thought about it honestly before answering. "A little. Anybody who isn't a little scared going into something like this is either lying or not thinking straight. But scared doesn't mean we're not going to do the job." The transport fleet launched a week later, carrying several thousand human soldiers, their equipment, and a modest escort of warships toward Coalition space. It would take over a month to arrive, even at Earth's best cruising speed, and during that time, the war back in Coalition territory only grew worse. The Kriv swarm had pushed the Coalition fleet back to the edge of the Valari home system. Valar Prime itself, the founding world of the Coalition and home to billions, was now within striking distance of the enemy for the first time in the war. Admiral Sethrin Vale stood on the bridge of the Dawnbringer, watching the tactical display with the grim knowledge that this might be the battle that decided everything. "Status of the defense line?" he asked. "Holding, sir, but barely," Cass reported. "We've lost 4 more ships in the last hour alone. The Kriv keep sending waves. They don't seem to care how many they lose." "They never do," Sethrin muttered. "Any word from the humans?" "Nothing new since Captain Voss's ship left, sir. It has been over a month." Sethrin closed his eyes briefly. He had allowed himself to hope, after the scout ship's visit, that help might arrive in time. Now, watching the enemy fleet grow closer on the display, that hope felt very far away. "All ships, hold the line," he ordered. "We fight for every hour we can buy. Valar Prime cannot fall." The battle that followed lasted nearly 2 full days. The Coalition fleet fought with everything it had left, and the losses were staggering. Ships that had survived years of war were finally torn apart. Pilots who had flown 100 missions did not come home. By the end of the second day, the defense line had been pushed back to the very edge of Valar Prime's orbit, and the Kriv swarm showed no sign of slowing down. It was in the middle of the third day, with the situation at its most desperate, that Earth's first fleet finally arrived. The Coalition sensors picked them up before anyone could explain what they were seeing. A formation of ships unlike anything in the Coalition's records, moving with a precision that suggested a level of discipline few fleets in the galaxy could match. At the head of the formation was a message, broadcast on every frequency the Coalition still had active, spoken calmly by a human voice. "This is Fleet Commander Adrian Cole, of the Earth Expeditionary Force. We received your call for help. We are here to assist. Coalition forces, hold your positions. We are moving to engage." On the bridge of the Dawnbringer, Sethrin Vale watched the human fleet sweep past his battered ships and dive directly into the heart of the Kriv formation, and for the first time in 6 years of war, he felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. The human ships fought differently than anything the Coalition had seen before. They did not hold back, did not retreat when losses mounted, did not hesitate even when facing numbers that should have made any sane commander pull back and regroup. They pressed forward, again and again, taking hits that would have destroyed lesser ships and continuing to fight anyway. On the ground, where Kriv forces had already begun landing on Valar Prime's surface to secure territory, human soldiers under Sergeant Marcus Reyes, and thousands of others like him, dropped into the chaos and did not stop moving forward. "They fight like they don't understand the concept of retreat," Cass said. watching the battle unfold with something close to awe. "No," Sethrin said quietly, remembering the old stories his grandfather used to tell. "They understand it perfectly. They simply choose not to use it unless there is no other option left." By the end of the battle, the Kriv assault on Valar Prime had been broken, not destroyed, not defeated for good, but broken, pushed back for the first time in years. It was a small victory in a war that was far from over, but for the exhausted, battered coalition, it was the first real victory they had tasted in a very long time. And back on Earth, General Whitfield received the reports from the front with a grim, steady focus. The first wave had done its job. But the reports also confirmed something else, something far more troubling. The Kriv swarm was bigger than anyone had estimated, and it was not going to stop just because it had lost one battle. "Sir," an aide said quietly, entering his office late that night, "Fleet Commander Cole is requesting reinforcements. A lot of them." Whitfield looked out the window at the night sky, thinking of everything that lay beyond it, of the war raging on the other side of the galaxy, and of the promise Earth had made. "Get me the shipyards," he said. "It's time we stopped holding anything back." The victory at Valar Prime bought the Coalition time, but not peace. Within 2 weeks, Coalition scouts confirmed what everyone had feared. The Kriv swarm was regrouping, and it was pulling in reinforcements from deeper within its territory that stretched farther than the Coalition had ever mapped. What had been pushed back at Valar Prime was only a fraction of the swarm's true strength, and now that fraction was growing again, faster than before. On Earth, General Whitfield stood before the full Joint Council, along with representatives from the government and the shipyards, laying out what needed to happen next. "The first wave held the line," he said, "but only just. Fleet Commander Cole's reports are clear. If we do not send more, and send more soon, Valar Prime falls, and after that, the rest of the Coalition falls with it. We are not talking about a border conflict anymore. We are talking about the potential extinction of several intelligent species." "And what happens after that, General?" asked Councilwoman Adeze Bello, one of the more cautious voices on the council. "If the Kriv swarm finishes with the Coalition, what makes you think it stops there? What makes you think it does not turn toward us next?" "Nothing makes me think that," Whitfield admitted. "In fact, I think it is likely the opposite. This enemy does not seem interested in negotiation or borders. It consumes what is in front of it and moves on to what is next. If the Coalition falls, we may simply be next on the list, whether we help them or not. The only difference is whether we face this enemy with allies still standing beside us, or whether we face it completely alone." The room went quiet. It was not the argument of charity anymore. It was the argument of survival, and that argument was much harder to dismiss. The vote passed within the day. Earth would commit to a full-scale response. Not a token fleet, not a limited expeditionary force, but the beginning of a true mobilization. Shipyards across every human colony were put on full production schedules. Reserve units were activated. Training centers that had been quiet for years suddenly filled with new recruits, many of them volunteers, who had heard the stories coming back from the front and wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. Among those volunteers was a young woman named Aiko Tanaka, barely 20 years old, who had grown up on one of Earth's outer colonies and had never seen real combat in her life. She stood in line at the recruitment center with hundreds of others, nervous but determined. "You sure about this?" asked the recruiter, processing her paperwork, an older man who had clearly seen this same conversation many times that week. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old First Contact," Aiko said, "about how scared those aliens were of us, how they thought we were monsters because we came from a hard world. I always thought that was sad. Now they're the ones in trouble, and we have a chance to show them we're not what they were afraid of. I want to be part of that." The recruiter smiled faintly and stamped her papers. "Then welcome aboard, soldier." Stories like Aiko's played out across Earth and its colonies by the thousands. It was not just soldiers who answered the call. Engineers volunteered to help design better ship systems for the unfamiliar terrain of Coalition space. Doctors and medics signed up to serve in field hospitals near the front lines. Even ordinary citizens found ways to contribute, donating resources, working extra shifts in factories building ship parts, anything they could do to support the effort. Meanwhile, at the front, Fleet Commander Adrienne Cole was doing everything she could to hold the line with what she had. The battle for Velar Prime's outer systems had settled into a grinding, brutal stalemate. The Kriv swarm probed the defenses constantly, testing for weaknesses, throwing wave after wave of ships and ground troops at any position that looked vulnerable. Human and coalition forces fought side by side now, learning each other's tactics, adapting to fight as a single force rather than two separate armies operating near each other. Sergeant Marcus Reyes found himself leading joint patrols with coalition soldiers for the first time, working alongside a Velari squad commander named Tessa Oren, a calm, sharp-eyed officer who had lost most of her original unit in the early years of the war. "Your soldiers do not stop," Tessa said to him one evening, as their combined unit dug in for the night on a war-torn stretch of Velar Prime's northern continent. "Even when they are wounded, even when the odds are bad, they keep moving forward. I do not understand it." "It's not that we don't feel fear," Marcus said. "Believe me, we do. But back home, we grew up learning that giving up gets you killed just as fast as fighting does, sometimes faster. So we don't. We find another way, or we make one." "Where I come from," Tessa said, "we are taught to preserve what we can, to retreat and regroup rather than lose everything in one stand." "That's not wrong," Marcus said. "It's just different. Different worlds teach different lessons. But I'll tell you this, fighting next to your people, I've learned some lessons of my own. You all know things about coordinating fleets and long-term strategy that we're still catching up on. This war, we're better off fighting it together than either of us would be fighting it alone." Tessa considered that for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is why the old treaties were written the way they were. Perhaps our ancestors understood something we forgot." As the weeks passed, the joint human coalition forces began to slowly turn the tide in the smaller battles, even as the larger war continued to hang in the balance. Human ships, while fewer in number than the full coalition fleet had once been, proved to be extremely tough, able to absorb damage that would have destroyed a coalition vessel of similar size. Coalition ships, in turn, brought speed, maneuverability, and long-range sensor technology that helped the combined fleet see Kriv attacks coming before they arrived. But even with this cooperation, the fundamental problem remained. The Kriv swarm was simply too large. For every ship destroyed, more emerged from deeper Kriv territory. For every ground assault repelled, another began somewhere else. The coalition, even with human reinforcements, was fighting a losing war of attrition, buying time rather than winning. It was Admiral Sethrin Vale who first raised the idea that would change the shape of the war. "We cannot win this by matching them ship for ship, soldier for soldier," he said, during a joint strategy session aboard the Dawnbringer, attended by both coalition officers and Fleet Commander Cole. "The Kriv swarm does not fight a war of strategy. It fights a war of numbers, and in a war of numbers, we will always run out first." "What are you suggesting?" Cole asked. "I am suggesting we need something that changes the equation entirely," Sethrin said. "Something that does not simply add another ship to the fight, but changes what is possible in this war. I do not know if such a thing exists. But if any species could build something like that, my instinct tells me it might be yours." Cole was quiet for a long moment, thinking. She knew exactly what Sethrin was hinting at, because she had heard the same rumors circulating through the fleet's command channels for weeks now. Earth's shipyards, in the years since the quiet decades following first contact, had not simply been building standard warships. They had been developing something new, something enormous, originally designed as a deterrent against threats that might one day come from beyond known space. Something that had never been used in actual combat, because until now, there had never been a need. "There may be something," Cole said carefully. "I cannot make promises. It is not my decision to make. But I will send the request back to Earth. If Command agrees, you may see something in this war that changes everything." That night, Cole sent an encrypted message back to Earth, marked for the highest priority, detailing the situation at the front and requesting authorization to deploy what Fleet Command back home referred to only by a single classified word, Dreadnought. The message reached General Whitfield 2 days later. He read it in silence, then called an emergency session with the highest levels of Earth's military command. The Dreadnought program had been Earth's most closely guarded secret for over a decade, a class of warship larger than anything humanity had ever built, powerful enough that the government had, until now, kept its existence hidden from the wider public, fearing what it might mean if such power were ever known to exist and never needed. "They're asking for the Dreadnoughts," Whitfield said to the assembled officers. "The coalition is on the edge of collapse. Fleet Commander Cole believes conventional reinforcements will not be enough to turn this war around in time." "Sir, those ships have never been tested in real combat," one officer said. "We don't fully know what they're capable of against an enemy like this." "We don't know what we're capable of until we're tested either," Whitfield said. "That's true of ships. It's true of people too. I think it's time we found out." The vote was called, and this time, there was little hesitation. The war in coalition space had already claimed the lives of thousands of human soldiers and sailors, and the reports coming back described an enemy that would not stop, would not negotiate, and would eventually threaten Earth itself if left unchecked. The Council authorized the deployment of the Dreadnought fleet, the first time in human history that these massive warships would leave the shipyards where they had been built. Word of the decision spread quickly through Earth's military, and though the details remained classified, rumors began to circulate among the soldiers and sailors already fighting at the front. Something big was coming, something that might finally give them the edge they needed. Sergeant Marcus Reyes heard the rumors from a supply officer during a routine resupply run, and though he did not know the specifics, he felt something shift in the air, a sense that the war was about to change. "You believe it?" Private Wu asked him that night, as their unit settled in for another cold watch on Velar Prime's war-torn surface. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Marcus admitted, "but I know Earth doesn't send rumors. If something's coming, it's coming because Command thinks we need it, and after everything I've seen out here, I trust that judgment." Far above them, in the quiet dark between the stars, the first of Earth's Dreadnought fleet was already breaking orbit, beginning the long journey toward coalition space. They were massive, silent shapes moving through the void, carrying more firepower than entire fleets of ordinary warships, built for a war that Earth had once hoped would never come. Now, that war had arrived, and humanity was answering with everything it had. The Kriv swarm launched its largest offensive yet 3 weeks after the Dreadnought fleet left Earth. It came without warning, a wave of ships and biological war constructs pouring out of Kriv territory, in numbers that dwarfed anything the joint human coalition forces had faced before. Admiral Sethrin Vale watched the tactical display aboard the Dawnbringer with a sinking feeling in his chest, because for the first time since the humans had arrived, it looked like even their combined strength might not be enough. "Confirm the numbers," he said quietly, hoping the sensors were wrong. "Confirmed, sir," Cass said, her voice tight. "This is at least 3 times the size of any Krev force we've encountered before. They are throwing everything they have at Velar Prime." Fleet Commander Adrian Cole's voice crackled over the Joint Command channel a moment later. "Admiral, this looks like a final push. They're not testing our defenses anymore. They're trying to end this in one battle." "Then we hold," Sethrin said, "for as long as we can." The battle that followed was unlike anything either side had fought before. The Kriv swarm attacked from every direction at once, overwhelming defense lines that had held for months in a matter of hours. Human and coalition ships fought desperately, falling back system by system, buying time with their lives while civilian transports raced to evacuate what remained of Velar Prime's population. On the ground, Sergeant Marcus Reyes and his joint unit found themselves cut off from resupply, fighting Kriv ground forces in the ruins of what had once been a thriving coastal city, with no clear way out and dwindling ammunition. "Command, this is Reyes. We need extraction. We are pinned down and running low on everything," Marcus called into his radio, ducking behind a shattered piece of concrete as Kriv fire tore through the air above him. "Copy, Sergeant. Extraction is not currently possible. All available transports are committed to civilian evacuation," came the reply, strained and apologetic. "Hold your position if you can. Reinforcements are inbound, but we don't have an ETA." Marcus looked around at his squad, at Private Wu and the others, all of them exhausted, all of them scared, all of them still holding their positions because there was nothing else to do. Beside him, Tessa Oren checked her weapon and gave him a grim nod. "We hold," she said. "As long as we can. Above the planet, The battle raged just as fiercely. Fleet Commander Cole's ships fought a desperate rearguard action, buying time for the evacuation, absorbing hit after hit as the Kriv swarm pressed forward relentlessly. Ships were lost by the dozen. Crews fought their vessels until the very last possible moment, and some did not make it out at all. It was, by every measure, the darkest hour of the entire war. And then, without warning, the sensors on every Allied ship in the system began registering something enormous, entering the edge of the battle. "Commander, I don't know what I'm reading," said one of Cole's sensor officers, staring at his display in confusion. "Massive contacts, sir, bigger than anything in our database. They just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge." Cole felt her heart skip. She knew immediately what she was looking at, even before the confirmation came through on the encrypted channel. "Fleet Commander Cole, this is Rear Admiral Grant Whitfield, commanding the 2nd Dreadnought Squadron," came a deep, steady voice over the comm. "General Whitfield's own nephew, chosen for the honor of commanding humanity's first Dreadnought deployment. We received your call for reinforcements. Apologies for the wait. We came as fast as we could." On the display, 6 enormous shapes moved into formation at the edge of the system, dwarfing every other ship in the battle, human or Coalition or Kriv. They were unlike anything the Coalition had ever built or even imagined, kilometers long, bristling with weapons, their hulls thick enough to shrug off attacks that would have vaporized ordinary warships in seconds. "All ships, this is Rear Admiral Whitfield," the voice continued, calm and steady, despite the chaos unfolding across the system. "Fall back to designated coordinates and regroup. The 2nd Squadron will take point from here." Admiral Sethrin Vale watched in stunned silence as the 6 dreadnoughts moved forward, not cautiously, not testing the enemy's strength first, but driving directly into the heart of the largest concentration of Kriv ships in the system. What followed was something he would remember for the rest of his life. The dreadnoughts did not maneuver like the smaller human warships he had grown used to fighting alongside. They moved with slow, deliberate power, absorbing hits from dozens of Kriv vessels at once, without any visible damage, while their own weapons tore through enemy formations with devastating force. A single dreadnought's main weapons array, when fired, could destroy an entire wave of Kriv attack craft in one pass. Their point defense systems shredded incoming fighters and missiles before they could even get close. "By the ancestors," Cass whispered, staring at the display. "They're not even slowing down." "No," Sethrin said quietly, watching the battle unfold with something between awe and disbelief. "They are not." The tide of the battle began to turn within the hour. Where the Kriv swarm had been pushing forward relentlessly for the entire day, it now found itself facing a wall it could not break through. The dreadnoughts held their position at the heart of the system, drawing the largest concentration of enemy forces toward themselves, absorbing the brunt of the assault while human and Coalition fleets regrouped and struck at the swarm's flanks. For the first time since the offensive began, the Kriv formations began to fracture, their numbers being ground down faster than they could be replaced. On the ground, Marcus Reyes and his squad watched the sky light up with distant explosions as the battle above shifted in their favor. Kriv ground forces, no longer receiving reinforcement and support from orbit, began to falter. "Command, this is Reyes," Marcus called again, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in hours. "Something's changed up there. Enemy pressure on our position is dropping." "Copy that, Sergeant," came the reply. "Extraction is inbound. Hold on just a little longer." 20 minutes later, a transport finally broke through to pull Marcus's exhausted squad out of the ruined city, and as it lifted off, Marcus caught a glimpse through the viewport of the battle raging in the sky above, dominated now by 6 massive human shapes, tearing through what remained of the Kriv assault force. "What in the world are those?" Private Wu asked, staring up at them in amazement. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "those are the reinforcements they were talking about." By the end of the second day, the great Kriv offensive had been broken, not merely pushed back, as it had been at the first battle of Velar Prime, but truly broken, its forces scattered and in retreat for the first time in the entire 6-year war. The 2nd Dreadnought Squadron, having absorbed the worst the swarm could throw at it and survived largely intact, pursued the retreating enemy formations, destroying stragglers, and preventing any organized regrouping. Admiral Sethrin Vale stood on the bridge of the Dawnbringer as the last reports came in, confirming that the immediate threat to Velar Prime had passed. He felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time: relief, deep and overwhelming, mixed with something like wonder. "Get me a channel to Rear Admiral Whitfield," he said. A moment later, the human commander's face appeared on the screen, tired but calm, the aftermath of the battle still visible in the strain around his eyes. "Admiral Vale," Whitfield said, "glad to see your fleet made it through." "Rear Admiral," Sethrin said, "on behalf of the Coalition of Free Worlds, I do not know how to properly express our gratitude. What your ships did today, we could not have survived without it." Whitfield gave a small, tired smile. "You held this line for 6 years before we ever got here, Admiral. Don't sell yourselves short. We just helped finish what you started." "Even so," Sethrin said, "the old stories our ancestors told about your people, the fear, the caution, I understand now why they felt what they felt, but I also understand now that they were wrong about the most important part. They thought your strength made you something to fear. I think, after today, that your strength is something the galaxy should be grateful for instead." Whitfield's expression softened slightly. "We remember the old stories too, Admiral. We remember that our ancestors reached out in friendship, and it wasn't returned the way we hoped. It would have been easy to hold on to that when your call came through. I'm glad Earth chose not to." Far behind the front lines, back on Earth, the news of the battle at Velar Prime reached General Whitfield's desk within hours, relayed at priority speed across the vast distance between the two fronts. He read the report twice, taking in every detail: the offensive broken, the Dreadnoughts performing beyond even the most optimistic projections, losses far lower than feared, and the Kriv swarm in full retreat for the first time in the war. He allowed himself a small, quiet moment of satisfaction before turning back to the mountain of work still ahead. The war was not over. The Kriv swarm, even broken and in retreat, was still an enormous threat, with territory and resources far beyond what the Coalition, or even Earth, fully understood. But for the first time since the SOS signal had first reached that quiet listening station months ago, it felt like the war could actually be won. "Sir," an aide said, stepping into his office, "Rear Admiral Whitfield is requesting further orders. He wants to know if the 2nd Squadron should press the advantage and pursue the retreating Kriv forces, or hold position and consolidate." Whitfield thought about it for a long moment, remembering the President's words from months ago, about being remembered as the ones who did not turn away. "Tell him to press forward," Whitfield said. "We've come this far, let's finish it." The campaign that followed the Battle of Velar Prime lasted nearly a year, but it was a very different kind of war than the one that had come before. With the Kriv swarm's largest offensive broken and its forces scattered, the combined human and coalition fleets finally had the initiative for the first time in the entire conflict. More dreadnoughts arrived from Earth in the following months, along with waves of additional support ships, ground forces, and supplies. What had begun as a small scouting mission and a single desperate call for help had grown into humanity's largest military commitment in its history. Fleet Commander Adrian Cole, now working closely with Admiral Sethrin Vale as something close to true partners rather than separate allied commands, led the joint push deeper into Kriv territory. The fighting remained fierce. The swarm did not simply give up, even in retreat, and every system reclaimed came at a cost. But slowly, steadily, the tide that had once run entirely against the Coalition began to turn the other way. Sergeant Marcus Reyes found himself, months later, standing on the surface of a newly liberated Coalition world, one of dozens that had been evacuated during the darkest days of the war, and were now, for the first time in years, seeing their people return home. He watched as Coalition families, Valari and Thune and Zondi alike, stepped off transport ships and looked around at homes they had never expected to see again, some of them crying, some of them simply standing in stunned silence. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" said Tessa Oren, standing beside him. The two of them had fought together for nearly a year now, through some of the worst battles of the campaign, and had become close friends in a way neither of them had expected when they first met. A year ago, I did not believe we would live to see this. Yeah, Marcus said. Me neither, honestly. But here we are. Do you think your people will stay after this is over? Tessa asked. Once the swarm is finally dealt with? Or will Earth go back to keeping its distance, the way it did before? Marcus thought about it for a moment before answering. I don't know what the politicians will decide. That's above my pay grade. But I'll tell you this. After everything we've been through together, I don't think it's going to be that simple to just walk away. Not for the people who fought this war anyway. We've buried friends together, fought side by side. That kind of thing doesn't just get forgotten because a treaty gets filed away in an archive somewhere. Tessa nodded slowly. I hope you are right. The final major battle of the war came 8 months later, at what Coalition scouts had identified as the closest thing the Kriev swarm had to a central hub, deep within its own territory, a massive construct of biological and mechanical material that seemed to serve as the source of the swarm's endless reinforcements. Admiral Sethrin Vale and Fleet Commander Cole, along with Rear Admiral Grant Whitfield and the now much larger Dreadnought fleet, led a combined assault meant to end the war once and for all. It was the largest battle either side had ever fought, dwarfing even the desperate final stand at Velar Prime. Dozens of dreadnoughts, hundreds of smaller human and coalition warships, and tens of thousands of ground troops converged on the Kriv hub in a coordinated assault that had taken months to plan. The fighting was brutal and lasted for nearly a full week, but in the end, the hub was destroyed, and with its destruction, the Kriv swarm's ability to endlessly replace its losses came to an end. What remained of the swarm's forces, no longer able to regenerate at the pace that had made them so dangerous, began to collapse in on themselves over the following months. Scattered remnants would continue to be a threat for years to come, requiring ongoing patrols and occasional battles, but the Great War that had nearly destroyed the coalition of free worlds was, for all practical purposes, over. Admiral Sethrin Vale stood on the bridge of the Dawnbringer, now heavily repaired and refitted after years of hard fighting, and looked out at the quiet stars beyond the viewport. It was the first time in 7 years that he had looked at that view without immediately checking for enemy contacts. Message from Fleet Command, sir, Cass said, and Sethrin noticed she was smiling, something he had not seen from her in a very long time. They're calling it. The war is over. Sethrin allowed himself a long moment of quiet before responding. Send word to every ship in the fleet, and Cass, send a personal message to Rear Admiral Whitfield and Fleet Commander Cole as well. Let them know the Coalition Council would like to formally invite Earth's representatives to Velar Prime to discuss what comes next. 6 months later, a formal ceremony was held on Velar Prime, in a city that had been rebuilt from the ruins left behind by the Kriv assault years earlier. Representatives from every coalition species gathered alongside a delegation from Earth, including General Whitfield himself, who had made the long journey personally for the occasion. Sergeant Marcus Reyes, now discharged from active duty, but invited as one of the many veterans of the war, stood near the back of the crowd, alongside Tessa Oren, watching as the leaders of both civilizations stood together on a stage built specifically for the event. After the war our ancestors fought so long ago, Counselor Yoon Tess said, addressing the massive crowd gathered before her. We believed the Deathworlders to be something to fear, a species shaped by a world so harsh that it could only produce something dangerous and difficult to understand. We were wrong. What that harsh world produced was not something to fear, but something the galaxy needed, and did not know it needed, until the day we called out in desperation, and they answered without hesitation. General Whitfield stepped forward next, looking out at the massive gathered crowd, humans and coalition citizens standing together, something that would have seemed impossible only a few years earlier. When the first signal reached Earth, Whitfield said, there were many who argued we should not respond, that the fear your ancestors showed toward mine all those years ago meant we owed you nothing. I am glad, more glad than I can properly express, that those voices did not win the argument. Because what we found out here was not a war that belonged only to you. It was a war that, had it gone differently, might eventually have found its way to our doorstep as well. We did not simply help allies in need. We found partners, and in many cases friends, that we did not know we were missing. The The ceremony concluded with the signing of a new treaty, one that would replace the old dusty agreements from centuries past, with something built on the trust that had been earned through years of shared sacrifice. Earth and the coalition of free worlds would stand together going forward, not as strangers bound by old paperwork, but as true allies. That evening, as the formal events wound down, Marcus Reyes found himself sitting on a quiet hillside overlooking the rebuilt city, sharing a drink with Tessa Oren, as the twin moons of Velar Prime rose over the horizon. "So," Tessa said, "what will you do now, Sergeant Reyes?" "The war is over. You could go home." Marcus considered the question for a long moment, looking out at the lights of the city below, a city that existed now because Earth had chosen, all those years ago, to answer a call for help instead of turning away. "I think I might stay for a while," he said finally, "see what this new alliance looks like, up close. Besides," he added with a small smile, "somebody's got to keep teaching your people how we do things back home. Seems like a waste to walk away now." Tessa laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I suppose it does." Far above them, in the quiet dark of space, the human dreadnoughts that had turned the tide of the war sat in orbit, no longer needed for battle, but remaining nonetheless, a quiet symbol of the promise that had been kept. What had begun as a single desperate SOS signal, sent out of fear and desperation by a civilization that had once been afraid of the very species it was calling on for help, had ended not just in victory, but in something far more valuable. It had ended in friendship, built between two very different worlds, forged in the fire of a war neither side had wanted, but both had chosen to fight, together, until the very end. And across the galaxy, word of what had happened began to spread. Other species, other worlds, hearing the story of the Deathworlders who had answered a call for help and stayed to fight until the end, began to wonder what other old fears, born from misunderstanding and time, might also be worth setting aside. The galaxy was a little less afraid of the dark that day, and it was, in no small part, because humanity had chosen, when given the chance, not to turn away.